Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me this beautiful afternoon. It's nice to see all your lovely faces. So let's just get started with some quick introductions, starting with me. My name is Samai. My pronouns are she and her. And I am one of the commissioners on the Commission for the Status of Women for San Mateo County. And I'm so honored to be having this conversation with you about mental health and wellness. This seems like such an important conversation, and I'm excited to hear all your perspectives. And then Tanya is my co-conspirator.
Tanya Beat, pronoun she, her, hers. I'm the director of the Commission on Status of Women, serving as the tech support today.
I'm Carol Gosho, pronouns she, her. I am the treasurer of NAMI San Mateo County. I've been on the board there for about 20 years. And by the looks of it, I'm probably old enough to be your grandmother.
Thank you, Carol, for joining us. And Safi, let's go to you next.
Hi, I'm Safi Jiroh, pronoun she, her, hers, and I'm the deputy director at LeaderSpring Center, a nonprofit intermediary organization that is social justice and racial justice driven, supporting nonprofit social sector, I would say government sector, and the for-profit sector.
Thank you, Safi. And Reza, how about you?
Hi, I'm Reza, Nezam-Mafi. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm a junior at Menlo Atherton High School, and I'm also on the Youth Action Board at SafeSpace, which is a youth-led advocacy nonprofit which focuses on like reducing the stigma around mental health and starting a new conversation.
And last but not least, Alysa.
So my name's Alysa Stanford. I am the Wellness Program Manager for San Mateo County employees. I'm also a certified health coach and exercise physiologist. And before coming to public sector, I worked a lot with low-income individuals and seniors.
Thank you, Alysa, for joining us. And we are going to get started with a quick grounding activity. So I'm going to give the floor to Safi for a few minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, so, we're getting used to this technology, and I think that in COVID-19, we have realized just how connected we really are to one another. And so let's stay connected and get grounded in taking 3 breaths together. Inhaling through your nose and exhaling, through your mouth. And exhale. Inhale again through your nose. And exhale through your mouth, slightly open. And one more together. Inhale through your nose. And exhale through your mouth. I'm going to invite you to imagine placing in your heart someone or something that fills you with joy, love, awe, and gratitude. It could be children laughing, it could be the sea, the ocean, the stars, mountains, whatever brings you joy, love, awe, and gratitude. And let it really fill you up and embrace you. Let it feed your spirit. I'm going to ask you to stay with the image and with the feelings for a few seconds. And as you imagine the person, the loved one, nature scene, whatever it is that you're holding, you may sense an openness and an expansion in your heart as you feel this joy, love, awe, and gratitude. This is for you to hold on to and to stay connected with. To revisit whenever you want. But as we have this conversation, stay expansive and open to the joy, love, awe, and gratitude that is for you. So you can open your eyes, come back to our meeting. Yeah, be invited into the conversation. Holding that.
Thank you, Safi. It's such a treat. So as we go into our conversation about mental health and wellness, it is so important for all of us to really be practicing all these resilience giving practices. So I appreciate you, Safi. And so our first question is about what you're seeing and sensing in regards to wellness and mental health for women, girls, and people who identify as gender non-binary. What are you seeing? What are you sensing? And we can start with you, Reza.
Yeah, definitely. So, there are a lot of disparities that I see in mental health between men and women. And although I really haven't experienced the struggles that come with being a woman, it is hard to ignore the movements that have arisen in America today. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie, or it's a documentary. It's called Misinterpretation. It's 2 words, like miss, M-I-S-S, interpretation, representation, sorry, misrepresentation. And it's basically a documentary that's produced by Jennifer Newsom. Her husband is Gavin Newsom, and it portrays the struggles and insecurities and fears that women live in every day. The film basically draws back a curtain to reveal a glaring reality that we live every day again, but we fail to see, which is how the media's limited and often disparaging portrayals of women and girls make it so difficult for them to feel powerful and really achieve leadership positions. The movie brought along a lot of positive movements and encouraged those who watched it to take the pledge against gender misrepresentations by using hashtags like #RepresentHer and #DisruptTheNarrative. The misrepresentation and objectification of women in the media really roots back to the basic patriarchal foundation that America, as well as basically most modern nations, were founded upon. And it's really that construct that has allowed sexual assault and domestic violence to persist in our society for so many centuries. It's the construct that has silenced victims through fear of speaking out against the dominant man, reinforced by society. And however, we have finally started to see some improvement on this front. We have really started to see improvement on this front with the Me Too movement, which is an effort to spark a new conversation around sexual assault and violence victims who are sharing their stories to fight for change. And nonetheless, there is immense progress to be made, but in light of this, it becomes ever more clear the important role that men must play in fighting these injustices and uplifting women like myself. And a movement that has really particularly resonated with me is the He for She movement. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it. It's a movement that was, it's founded by the UN, which is a solidarity movement for the advancement of gender equality with the goal of achieving gender equality by encouraging men and boys to step up as advocates for change and really start a new conversation. And that's really what was really powerful for me to see, because I feel like that's a stance that I really want to take and a stand that I'm taking now.
Thank you, Reza. How about you, Alysa? What are you seeing at your workplace?
So we have been doing check-ins with most of our departments, and what we're really seeing for women is the struggle to parent and telework. Now that kids are out of school and they're being homeschooled, although I guess they're on summer break now, just having the kind of caregiver role and professional role all day, every day. They're having a really hard time separating work from home. They have no work-life balance. They're starting to get burnout. And so we're definitely seeing people stressed. Their self-care has become the lowest priority on their list. They're definitely prioritizing the people around them, friends and family. And we're seeing a lot of the healthy habits that they had, before the pandemic kind of go out the window. Any time that they had set for themselves every day before or after work to go to the gym or to take a class or be involved in a support group, even something as simple as Weight Watchers, that really feels like a community for a lot of people. All of that has kind of changed to a virtual format or been closed. So we're seeing people just really struggling to get back into those self-care routines, which are crucial for resilience, as we were talking about earlier. So we're seeing lots of stress, lots of anxiety, lots of sleep issues, changes in access to care, things that they relied on before the pandemic, because they've changed, not being able to talk to their therapist or have their peers in person to talk to about different issues, even things like physical touch, being able to hug somebody, being able to, share space and see facial expression and body language in a different way in person than you kind of do on camera, feelings of social isolation. So those are kind of the big themes that we're hearing about.
And Carol, you represent NAMI, and so I'm sure you're seeing big trends taking place.
NAMI, for those of you who don't know, stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness. And even though we started the whole grassroots family advocacy movement 45 years ago here in San Mateo, many, many people and groups do not know what NAMI is. We, of course, have been all in lockdown, working remotely. We have a very small staff. We have an interim director, and the 3 staff members are part-time, all women. I think they're all managing well. We got our support groups up online early on, soon after lockdown. And we do family-to-family education courses. That's also now online. So I haven't heard specifically regarding women or girls of there being any issues, but I'm sure there are, because I can speak from a personal standpoint that I have a daughter who's 55, and she had a relapse just before the lockdown and had been working as a massage therapist and was having trouble with her meds. And because of the, she has Kaiser insurance, because of having to deal remotely with care, which is very difficult, of course, when you're going through a breakdown. It escalated, and she ended up in the hospital where she is right now. So we could actually use her as an example of what can happen and all the difficulties that all of us have to deal with mental health and the striving for wellness. And even though she had gone for 17 years with no issues at all and no medication, there can be relapses for various reasons.
Oh, thank you, Carol, for just your trust in sharing that story with us. I'm sure it's particularly tough to have a loved one in a hospital right now. And we'll go on to a question about telemedicine in a minute, but it's just a really tough time to be with sickness right now.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So Safi, you work with leaders, and leaders currently are under phenomenal pressure, especially in nonprofits and social sector, it's a lot of women in positions of leadership who are having to look at like possibly closing doors, right?
Yeah.
So a little bit about that.
Sure. First, I do want to just acknowledge Carol and what you shared, that, and especially as, someone who is, part of an organization, that is, providing support and help. So we hold space for people like you, right? In the work that we do. And I just have to echo Alysa that, so we have cohorts of communities of color, and mostly women of color. And we are seeing and hearing the same thing, from everyone. You have, moms that had become full-time teachers overnight, kind of overnight. And the stress of that has been really incredible, for women, especially single moms. And also that there seems to have been an increase in work, right? So even though you have a, shelter in place and you're at home, people are Zooming at night and early in the morning and doing more emails, and, you can have back-to-back meetings because you don't have to travel, to places. So it's just more. And burnout is real because of that. So it hasn't been a reduction of work, particularly when you're working in communities that, that are under resources and the most impacted in all of this. So then the need is even greater, right? So we are seeing that. And then, the what we sense and what we have heard people articulate is fatigue, real fatigue, and then holding grief and sadness in all of it, and yet persevering, this incredible, thing, that we do to adapt and to, and we keep hearing pivot, we're pivoting. And I used to be a dancer, and I'm like, it's not pivoting. This is spinning, we're doing, this is something else we're doing here, so yeah, it's that. And then also just the ownership of taking care of, and I know we'll talk about, caregivers, and we talk about a lot of things when we talk about caregivers, but one I want to put on the agenda is caring for community, your neighborhood and your broader communities of people. So yeah, we're seeing and hearing those things.
Yeah, thank you, Safi. I love that image. We're not pivoting because pivot is a small little adjustment, right? We're spinning, full on spinning, and we are not in control of the direction. We're not in control of the speed, right? So that really is so apt. So this next question is really about telemedicine, right? Or just even having group conversations or doing things like this where we're talking to each other, but really we're talking, at a screen. When does it work, and when does it just isn't good enough?
So I want to bring up a positive about having all these virtual meetings, is I think, with mental health, everybody has a different level of comfortability talking to their peers or talking to a professional. And I think the nice thing about having Zoom meetings with, a behavioral health therapist is you can mute yourself and you can turn your camera off if you need to cry or collect yourself. And when you're in person, you can't do that. It's very vulnerable to share the things that you're going through. And I think, there are pros and cons of kind of being able to detach from the experience. And I've noticed with some of our employees and some of my clients that they're really opening up to me in a way that they would have never done before if it wasn't virtual. And they're feeling like they can get really emotional. And I think it's, in a way, kind of less real. And so, that's a little bit protective. There's like a built-in wall there. So I think that's maybe a good thing.
to add on to that, and kind of just to like make on another point, I think that's definitely true. I think I've noticed that with myself as well. Just as someone that like receives mental health services, I've definitely noticed that there is more of like not a disconnect, but like more of like a distance, I feel like, which there definitely is, but more of a distance in that you can kind of like, you know, turn, like you said, turn your camera off, turn your voice out, turn on mute, and it's just not the same, which I think is definitely a plus. But I think also on a downside of, I think, telemedicine and teletherapy is that I find that even myself, but also with other providers, that there's a lot of misdiagnosis just because you can't always, you know, gauge how severe the situation is or how like to what extent it's at, because, you know, like you were saying, also you can turn off your camera, like you don't exactly see everything that's going on in person. You're not seeing them in person. It's a different emotion, it's a different vibe you're getting when they're sitting across from you, instead when they're in your camera and just looking at someone and they're like, oh, I think you have this. Like, it's much harder, I feel like, which is something that's definitely been concerning.
I would say what's interesting for us, again, you know, we work with leaders and we convene leaders, and we're, you know, very much a relational organization. And, you know, we have leaders who have, you know, shared that, you know, to be able to come together and convene with one another, you know, it's been an antidote to isolation, right? That's what we have always heard. And so now here we are with this technology. And still what we're hearing is that the opportunity still to come together like this is, we've been told that, you know, our meetings, our convenings are, you know, the one Zoom call that is important to them, because they are, there's still this ability to connect with one another, you know, even if it looks like we're like bobbleheads on the screen, but that there's still a connection anyway, you know, that we didn't shut down everything and completely disconnect, that that we, you know, are able to work to sort of transcend the technology as deliberately as we can. I mean, it is what it is, but to, you know, just to really help people connect. And it's been really, it's been interesting to you know, to hold a screen as a space and really, you know, help people feel and see beyond the technology, and that it has been welcomed. I mean, people are still wanting to see each other in person and, you know, and all of that, but you know, we have, you know, people still show up. They're not choosing to disconnect. They're still, you know, showing up. So, so when I think of the space, how we have always held the space, you know, was really for renewal and support and some kind of, you know, way to buoy people, you know, so that they can continue to do the work, but then maybe a little differently. So, you know, for us, you know, we had to use it, and it has proven actually to be supportive, you know, to people, just in terms of staying connected.
I agree with everything everyone has said, that there are pros and cons, and to stay connected and for people to be able to see each other all at once in a group is very good and supportive. But on the other hand, when it comes to dealing with doctors, and if you're in a difficult situation, and it's not often, actually, I don't know that sometimes doctors aren't even doing a Zoom meeting. They're trying to conduct their sessions by phone, and they really have no idea what is going on with that individual and how difficult, what difficulties they may be going through. And you know, they say that something like 56% of communication is body language. It's a very high percentage. So it really is important for people, human beings, to see each other.
There is also this added element, you know, because we're all going through this together. I have just seen this growth in resources of people offering free grief sessions, and there's so much available right now. I used to volunteer for this like peer coaching, conflict coaching for work text line. I mean, services like that are just growing because people are just seeing like you can take advantage of this technology, and you can convene groups of people who are all over the world, for shared purpose. And yeah, sometimes it shines, and there are definitely limitations. So thank you all for that.
Also what has been interesting, as a coach and as a facilitator, of these convenings is learning how to read body language, like through this technology, and really having to check in, with people. Like, it's like, I find myself really checking in more and asking people to check in with themselves, with what's going on, with them. Is there anything, that's stirring, for them? But just really having to read body language through the technology, has been, not a challenge, a good challenge. I would put it that way. It's been a good challenge.
Yeah, maybe it has prompted you to make space for that, right? Because you can't take it for granted that we're not in the same room, so you have to do it intentionally. Yeah, I understand that. So Safi brought this up a little bit earlier, in this conversation about caring for the caregivers, right? I've seen statistics about how COVID is very much a gendered crisis, because think about like who are teachers, who are nurses, right? Like think of all the professions, all the caregivers. And so what can we do, especially as a commission, we're particularly concerned with that question. How do we keep caring for the caregivers so that we can have more resilience? Because this isn't going to end in a month, maybe this year, right? So how can we keep caring for the caregivers?
Well, my thought was that we could be listening more, trying to reach out to groups. I don't know, is the question aimed at within our own realm? How do we care for the caregivers, or just generally in our community?
More generally in the community. So thinking of hospice workers and actually it could go in either direction, because I'm also noticing how a lot of teenagers are now caring for their younger siblings, or I heard a story recently about this young man. He was going to be the first college goer in his family, but now his plans have changed because his mom lost work, and so he has to work, right? And so there is a sense of caregiver as if that's your profession, and then there are just people who are caregiving because they have to.
It comes down, I think, to reaching out to people and then listening to what they say they need or would like. And then, of course, I think so much of our community or across the nation, percentage-wise, people do not have the technology. They don't have access to be able to do what we're doing. Maybe they don't have internet capability. And so there's a high percentage, I think, in our community who are not getting any attention, much attention at all.
One of the things that I think we have to do to even start the conversation about how we support caregivers is breaking the stigma of self-care is selfish, because I hear a lot of people in different caregiving professions, whether it was something that they learned through school or something that they learned when they were being raised, something in their environment. When you're a caregiver, your first priority is the people that are always receiving your care. And I think the more we start to kind of publicize all these different expressions, like you can't pour from an empty cup. And as a community, we identify the caregivers around us and we make space for them to, you know, have time away from their caregiver responsibilities. I think also employers need to, you know, think about rotating people from different locations or having rotating shifts, because it's all about tolerance. I mean, whatever your caregiver role is, if you're exposed to it all day, every day at work, and then you're doing it all day, every day at home, you're going to get burnt out pretty quickly. So I think just really having a really strong theme of it, you're taking care of everybody else, you also need to take care of yourself. We are going to support you in taking care of yourself, and we're going to build policies and procedures to make sure that you have the time, the resources, the space to do that.
Yeah, I had a really similar opinion actually, almost exactly like that. Really about like making sure that these caregivers, they know that, not they know, but that they should know that, you know, we're all there for each other. This is like it's a worldwide thing, but also that they should, I mean, almost that we can help them by, you know, teaching them about self-awareness, self-management, even social awareness, relationship management, these things that are really important to these leaders that, like, you know, I don't think they get, you know, I don't think they have that. Like Alyssa was saying, like, it's very, very easy to burn out, and it's not going to be very hard for that to happen, especially when there isn't this like instilled idea of you can take care of yourself. Like, that's okay. You don't have to worry about what everyone else. There shouldn't be this worry of what everyone else is going to say if you want to take a day off, or if you want to take a break, or say, I'm gonna like do this small thing for myself. You know, like, it shouldn't have to be so hard to get that break.
Yeah, and ditto. You know, really, there are a couple of things I want to say about this, and that is, you know, it's so American to work the way we do. We work a lot, and caregivers work more. they work even more, and that there is a kind of a nature with caregivers, right? That there's certain people who step into these roles, certain people who are called, you know, into these roles where, you know, they really are second or third or fourth. I mean, there's there's something about that, right? But then you have that coupled with a society, you know, that says, you know, that really makes production and, you know, really gives high value to that. And so part of that is, you know, just working more and caring for more people, and, you know, doing more and just getting a little bit of sleep, right? And that burnout really is the last straw. Rundown lasts for years. Rundown can last for decades before people get to break down burnout, right? And so the idea of, I think a couple of things need to happen. One is that I do think that, you know, as we, and I know this has been ongoing for caregivers, but, you know, that, you know, we really need political action around the distribution of resources for caregivers. And I say distribution of resources, meaning that in order to take time off, you have to have a supply of other caregivers that can step in and do work, right? And if you don't have that, then, you know, you're really leaning on the same group of people. And I think that that this needs to be just like with teachers who are underfunded and you know, underpaid and overworked, and, you know, all that the community as a whole, society as a whole needs to pinpoint this, you know, as a problem, you know. So so yeah, I do think that there needs to be political action around that. I think campaigns are important, you know, because we are in a mindset where there is shame around taking care of yourself, not unless you are wealthy. You know, very wealthy people understand this, and they understand it so much that they can hire people to do all the work that needs to get done, you know, and take care of themselves, you know, physically, mentally, etc. So I look at this as, you know, sort of middle class, you know, a middle class and lower, like, deep issue in this society. Yeah, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot to step up and support. We can say we want that support, but it takes a lot to step up and do it and say, you know what, take a week off, take a couple of days off. I'm going to step in for you.
Ooh, Safi, yes, admitting you need a break, especially when the world has such a high need. That's a tough internal decision, and I appreciated what you said about you know, just there being a class dynamic into this idea of self-care. I read something in the beginning of Shelter in Place. I read an article about how professional class white women have been able to achieve work-life balance by relying on services by lower income women of color who do the house cleaning to child rearing, right? And so there is that element as well. And now that we don't have all those services available, right? How are we supposed to have this elusive thing called work-life balance, you know? Yeah, absolutely, I appreciate that. So one of the threads that we've talked about a little bit is, you know, there are systems in place that are supposed to care for us. Sometimes those work, sometimes those don't. And there are communities, especially in this country, that systems have never been designed for them. You know, as an immigrant woman of color, rarely is a system designed for me. You know, the physical infrastructure of my house, you know, I'm a short person, all the counters are too tall, right? I mean, no, you know, it's just like in every way I have learned that. And I'm married to a Midwestern, cisgender, white man, educated. And the first time he experienced a system not being designed was when he got a mental health diagnosis. And then he realized, oh my goodness, this is what it's like. You know, when you have a mental illness and you can barely get out of bed, but you're the one who's supposed to call and make the appointment, right? You still have to project manage your own care in that system. And sometimes the learning comes from looking at communities that have had to provide care because the systems of care aren't designed for them. So I would love to just talk about like, what can we learn from like First Nations people and about like mutual aid programs, you know, and for people who have had to just figure out care, right, by themselves. What can we learn about that?
Did anyone see the play on PBS called Gloria last week about Gloria Steinem? And I'm sure they'll, or you could Google it, but part of that play, it had a woman who was the head of the Iroquois I don't remember what her title was, but she was like the leader of the Iroquois tribe. She was representing them. And for the first time, I learned that it was a matrilineal tribe. So the women held the power, they controlled the money, and something about Benjamin Franklin studied their tribe to base some of his thoughts about how to fashion democracy and the founding of the country. Of course, this is after they totally decimated all of the Native Americans. But nevertheless, I thought it was fascinating that the Iroquois nation was a matrilineal group. And so that prompts me to want to study more about what exactly, how they were organized and what we can learn from that. And I do think that we do need to have more women in very high leadership positions running things. That would help a lot. And then how do we, I guess one of the things we could do is to put a value on women's work in the home and pay through Social Security benefits or retirement or whatever, start there. and go on up. But it's very difficult when we're talking in very general terms about how to help people who don't have the wherewithal to pay for services, and particularly in lockdown, even if we wanted to step in and help our neighbors, babysit or whatever, give them a day off, how can we do that? And let's assume that we're going to be in a very isolated situation for over a year or more. What are we going to do? I'm in the over 70 age group, and I'm definitely trying to be very careful. And so I'm going to probably be one of the last ones to go out and party and sit in restaurants and so on, even though everyone else might be, until there is a vaccine. And even then, there's no guarantee. So I think we need to be thinking long-term about how are we going to function as a community, as a society, if we're in lockdown for a long time, over a year.
I think something that I've definitely learned since we've been in this shelter in place since March is peer-to-peer support. And I had heard about it. I mean, obviously I'd known about it before that, but ever since I've joined SafeSpace, you go through a few trainings, basically like workshops. And a few of them were actually really relevant to this, which was, I think it was how to be a peer first responder and helping a friend in crisis, which were two that were really interesting to me. I just think like these trainings taught me how I can be a friend, a family member, or even a complete stranger and help them in a time of crisis. It doesn't have to be like, obviously it doesn't have to be like right then and there, they're like having a panic attack or there's something's going really, really badly, but it did teach me how to like de-escalate a situation and just like keep everyone calm. And I think it's something that when we know that there aren't always the right funds for mental health services and people can't always pay out of pocket for such expensive therapy or psychiatry or things like that, that we have to be there for one another and really just like, we have to not train ourselves, we have to be open to helping everyone in our community, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, one of the populations that is underutilized in the US is seniors. And I think that kind of mobilizing a volunteer force to help fill in those gaps that maybe other agencies are not, you know, providing resources is crucial. Kind of finding a way to get the older generations that still need occupational or vocational wellness after retirement to come back in and work with the younger generations and to still get to use their unique skills, talents, abilities. I also think it's hard right now because everybody is so overwhelmed with everything happening in the world and in their personal lives. But if you have the emotional bandwidth or you have the funds, kind of taking a look at your local community and thinking, how can I make sure that everybody is able to attain a certain level of health and happiness? And, you know, something as simple as going on to GoFundMe or websites like that, where you can donate to families or individuals, or, you know, becoming part of an organization that already exists, or starting a movement yourself and starting an organization. Just taking advantage of volunteers and using extra funds in the community toward the community, I think is essential. Even college students, I know it's kind of controversial right now because a lot of the unpaid internships are a hardship for students, but thinking about using college students who are bright and energetic and they have so much to offer us, you know, helping them get involved in the local community. I feel like we have more resources than we use right now.
I would say, I mean, there are a couple of things. I think of, so as I think of the African-American community being one of those, you know, communities in which the system was never designed to care for well or support or, you know, anything. And thinking about even myself as a young girl, that there was seemed to be so much more a sense of community and where neighbors took care of neighbors. Neighbors knew when, there was something, someone needed something and brought it to them. And home remedies, from grandparents and great grandparents, like sharing those. And I think, who said, I was at a lunch, and this was many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And the speaker, who is a minister here in Oakland, she was talking about, and she's probably well in her 80s now. And she was talking about how there was a time when women gathered, like at the rivers when they were washing their clothes, and they shared medicines and they shared, all kinds of things, with one another in community. They knew about what was happening in everyone's life and household and could determine, how they could help. And, then there was the Industrial Revolution where, you had then wash machines and certain things start coming into your home, and then you didn't need to gather anymore. And then you didn't pass down necessarily to younger women, the things that, you were sharing as an elder council, at the river, right? And so for me, I feel that there has been such a disconnect from, from indigenous ways of communing, and I feel that we, need to realize the village again, define it, and then determine, who we're going to be in it. I think there's some unlearning that we have to do around it, because we have been, taught to depend on the medical industry, in many ways, and to turn away from, deep knowledge and all of that, to turn away from that. And so now, even when the system didn't care for you well, that this system was nevertheless better than anything your grandmother knew, right? So, so I do think that there's a, for me, there's a call to, to define, the village. And it's hard, this is really hard. As you were saying, Carol, my mom's 80, and I've been, so careful. I mean, I've seen my mom once since March.
Oh, yeah, it's hard.
And it is because I want to make sure that I don't make her sick.
Right.
Because I don't know, any 2 weeks, right? Like, I don't know. And I want to just make sure of that. I've even told my sons, like, don't bring the great grandkids over, don't do that. Like, that's really hard. So it's sort of figuring out, so how do I make sure she's okay? So it's like, let's just make sure she's okay. She doesn't need anything. We keep in touch with her all the time, and we Zoom conference all the time. But it's a really hard thing, so the village looks a little different. We may not be able to touch one another, but we will get you what you need, and if they're, just sort of reaching out in that way, like you were saying, Alysa, there's a lot, my pastor was saying, he said, we don't want anyone in this community to go hungry because of COVID, so he's like sort of pulled together lots of businesses and, all of that to fund, not giving people, bags of food, but boxes and cases and, of food to store up, for them in the community, like respond to the needs of people as a part of the member of the village,
And how did he fund that?
Yeah, he fundraised. He reached out to businesses. He reached out to stores and businesses to provide, funding. And then there were when some businesses heard he was doing it because they want to do, they want to give right now. Right, and when they, heard that he was doing it, businesses just started showing up and handing over checks, you know, to support, you know, doing it. Yeah. So there are folks like, they don't know where to plug in and how to plug in, but they want to give, you know. So there are resources, you know, out there, but people don't know how to channel them.
That's right.
So I just, Safi, I appreciate you bringing up the idea of a village. I used to work with indigenous communities, and we call that traditional knowledge. How do you pass down traditional knowledge? And I'm part of the Latino community. I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And there are members of communities that can't reach out, right? Or they've been taught by the medical Western system that they will die if they seek treatment. And that has happened historically, especially with the African American community. So when we look at the Bay Area, you know, I look at cultural groups, the Pacific Islander groups out there that are really coming together to connect with each other, to provide food for each other, because food is such a great connector. And to really just provide a sense of community, even if it's virtual, even if it's through a virtual church or a fundraiser or an event. I think that I love to be able to seek the elders in our communities for the ways that they've always successfully raised their families. And they are still valid to this day. And I think that's something that is discounted too much. Our elders who can provide some words of wisdom. I'm also a big believer in sharing stories in any way possible, and I do that through art. And I think media and art is a way that we all can participate and express ourselves. And I know that young people especially are doing a great job at producing media, getting out there on TikTok, or just even basic Facebook live streaming, or creating poetry and sharing that is such a wonderful way to connect and express yourself. So those certain ways that we don't necessarily look at health is what is making us healthy, is that expression of words, visual, audio, and we must continue to support those funds, because as we're already experiencing, they're the first to be cut. And so being able to look at funding outside of the normal corporate ways of making money is really important. And I know with my employer, which is the county, there's so many other ways that we do that as well. There is emphasis on taking time off and expressing yourself and connecting and wellness. And so I'm very happy to see that. So I try on the outside and looking at the LGBTQ community, how do we do that? Open mic nights, comedy nights, anthologies of written stories to be able to express ourselves. So that's my last add to this conversation about connecting community, is art and media.
Oh, thank you, everybody. It's been such a rich conversation, and I just so appreciate having this very well-rounded perspective and this ability to share wisdom with each other and just share our stories. We need more and more of this. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. And Alysa is going to take us out with an activity.
Yes, so we are going to do progressive muscle relaxation, which is a deep relaxation technique. It does help with things like depression and anxiety, and should lower our breathing rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. So I'm not sure if you all can see me. I can't see the cameras anymore, so but we're going to find a comfortable position in our chairs. We are going to put our feet flat on the ground. You can even spread your toes and really think about connecting with the earth and getting grounded. You're going to relax your hands in your lap. We're going to bring our shoulders up, back, and down into a big shoulder roll. Once we're nice and comfortable, we're going to gently close our eyes and we're going to take a few deep belly breaths, really thinking about expanding right behind the belly button and exhaling. A couple more times. Inhale into the belly. Little pause, exhale. And one more time. And exhale. Good. Okay, so now that we're in a nice relaxed position in our chair and we have slowed down and deepened our breathing, we're going to go muscle group by muscle group and really relax. First thing we're going to do is pick up our right arm just a couple inches above our lap and drop it. Then our left arm a couple inches above our lap and drop it. Take our right leg a couple inches off the ground and drop it. And our left leg a couple inches off the ground and drop it. Now our arms are relaxed, our legs are relaxed. Then you're going to take your right hand, squeeze it into a really tight fist, squeeze, 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 and relax. Then our left hand, squeeze it into a really tight fist, ball it up, and relax. Now our legs are relaxed, our arms are relaxed, our hands are relaxed. Now we're going to pull our belly button in, squeeze it, pull that belly button in toward your spine, squeeze, 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 like you're trying to fit into a pair of pants that are too small, and relax. Let your belly totally relax. Maybe it's even in your lap. We're going to lift our shoulders up all the way up toward our ears, squeeze, 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 squeeze those shoulders. You should have no neck, and drop them. Our shoulders are relaxed, our arms are relaxed, our legs are relaxed, our feet are heavy and connecting with the earth. Our hands are relaxed. And next we're going to concentrate on our face. Take the tip of your tongue, push it hard against the roof of your mouth, pressing the roof of your mouth with your tongue. Squeeze, 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 and relax. Let your tongue find a comfortable position in your mouth, maybe toward the back of your mouth. Next, you're going to squeeze your eyes shut as hard as you can, really squeezing those eyelids, and relax. Your eyes are gently closed. The next thing we're going to do is smile as big as you can. Use all those smile muscles, stretch out your lips, big smile, and relax. So your eyes are relaxed and gently closed. Your jaw is relaxed, your mouth is relaxed, your tongue is in the back of your mouth. Your hands are relaxed, your shoulders are relaxed. Your arms are heavy in your lap. Your legs are heavy in your chair. Your feet are heavy on the ground. Your belly is relaxed in your lap. And you're going to return to that deep belly breathing. On every exhalation, you're going to relax a little bit further and get heavier in your chair. Inhaling deeply into the belly and exhaling any tension. Inhaling into the belly. Exhaling any tension. Keep doing those deep belly breaths at your own pace. Feet are heavy, legs are heavy, hands are heavy in your lap, shoulders are relaxed down away from your ears. Mouth is relaxed, eyes are gently closed. Think about any tension you have in your forehead. Relax your forehead. On your next exhalation, think about any tension in your ears and relax your ears. Let's do a belly breath all together. Inhale. As you exhale, release any tension in your neck, any feelings you're holding in your throat. And let's take one last relaxing breath together. Inhale. And long, slow exhale.